Vale, pues si os parece vamos a ir empezando, porque vamos con un pelín de retraso. Bueno, yo arranco y los que estáis por fuera vais entrando cuando os parezca. Bueno, muchísimas gracias por acudir a la convocatoria. Es un placer muy grande para todo el equipo de Fundación Telefónica presentar hoy esta exposición con los ojos bien abiertos, 100 años de fotografía Leica, organizada conjuntamente con Leica. Como sabéis, hace más de 100 años, allá por 1914, una empresa que fabricaba microscopios en un pueblo muy pequeño de Alemania decidió apoyar la aventura del brillante ingeniero Oskar Barnack, apostando por el riesgo, apostando por la innovación, y el resultado, como bien sabéis, sigue siendo vigente 100 años después. Una cámara silenciosa, discreta, siempre a punto en el bolsillo del abrigo, muy fácil de utilizar, muy bonita en cuanto a su diseño. Como podéis ver, prácticamente podríamos estar hablando de un móvil. Y, por supuesto, esta exposición trata de esto, de este audaz invento, de cómo se logró dar el salto de la estática y pesada cámara de placas a una cámara de apenas 400 gramos. Como decía, habla de eso, pero sobre todo habla de lo que los artistas fueron capaces de hacer con esta tecnología. O sea, la posibilidad de registrar el mundo desde un punto de vista totalmente distinto y de cambiar la mirada del siglo XX. Esta exposición nos muestra algo que en Fundación Telefónica tratamos de plasmar en muchos de nuestros proyectos, que es cómo la innovación tecnológica a menudo es la semilla para una revolución creativa. La tecnología de Leica daba respuesta a las inquietudes de una época marcada por cambios sociales, por el dinamismo, por la inmediatez, por la avidez de imágenes. La cámara era prácticamente la extensión del ojo y permitía pasar de ser un mero observador a ser prácticamente parte integrante de la acción. Como vais viendo, es una exposición que nos cuenta el siglo XX a través de imágenes muy icónicas que todos conocemos, también a través de otras imágenes más desconocidos, pero de algún modo nos habla también de muchas cosas del siglo XXI. Quisiéramos agradecer a Leica y a todo el equipo el haber impulsado este proyecto y el haber hecho posible que se pueda ver en Madrid. También agradecer a Michael Koetzle, el comisario de la muestra, el haber compartido durante estos días tantísimos conocimientos, tantísimas historias alrededor de la muestra. Y, por último, dejadme que agradezca también al equipo de Fundación Telefónica, muy en especial a María Ornedo, y al equipo de personas que han colaborado en su diseño, a Marta Banac y a 3 tipos gráficos. Antes de iniciar la charla de Michael, me gustaría también dar la palabra al señor Andreas Kaufmann, presidente de Leica, y a la señora Karin Ren-Kaufmann, directora artística de Leica. A ambos, muchísimas gracias por estar hoy con nosotros en esta presentación. Muchas gracias.
Once upon a time, more than 100 years ago, a little boy named Oskar saw for the first time the light of day. Angels predicted him that something amazing and special would happen in his life. Little Oskar was born in a small town called Lünow, grew up in Berlin, and later on worked as an engineer. And in his free time, he loved to go out into the nature and discovered the beauty and the power of nature. He wanted to capture all these beautiful moments. Therefore, he was very, very enthusiastic about photography. But in the olden days, everyone who wanted to photograph has to take very, very heavy equipment to be able to shoot some pictures. Unfortunately, our Oskar was a bit ill. He had asthma. And it was very exhausting and dangerous for him to carry all this heavy stuff. But sometimes an illness could be a chance in someone's life. Oscar's angels helped him to be able to look deep into the future of photography. Oscar started to develop the first compact portable camera of the world. But the idea was born. But how should he proceed? He needed some help to realize his dream. And in Ernst Leitz and Max Berek, he found the right partners who were able to transfer his idea into reality. The Ur-Leica became reality. And with this camera, Oscar revolutionized the whole world of photography. He continues to live today in all our activities by Leica. And Oscar lived happily ever after. Signora and signores, with this short fairy tale about Oscar Barnack, you will experience and see later on in this exhibition, from the beginning until today, the whole story of this camera. I wish you an inspiring and nice evening, and thank you for choosing art photography instead of football. Thank you for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, the famous American photographer Elliott Erwitt was once asked by a young journalist, she was really looking admiringly to him, "Mr. Erwitt, tell me, what's the best camera?" And Elliott, and people who know him know he has a certain kind of humor, said, "The one you always carry around with you." Which means, if I would ask someone here, is there anybody who has not a smartphone and does not take pictures with a smartphone? Probably nobody. Which means we're all photographers nowadays. We're shooting huge amounts of pictures every day. We are in a position that we can use the camera you always have with you, here, tiny little one. You are in a position which 100 years ago, 103 years ago, was not possible. And the Leica, who was invented as the Ur-Leica in March 1914, started basically this revolution in the second step. The first step was basically the invention of photography. The second step, in my opinion, the Leica, who made it flexible, who made it possible to carry around, who created a totally different kind of picture quality. And the third revolution started, and it's not known worldwide, 1999, with a Japanese company who nobody knows that this was the first company who put a camera into a phone. That was Toshiba. The Kames phone, which was only produced for Japan, was a very funny thing. It was basically what Snapchat is nowadays. You could take a tiny little picture, then add some ears or some, hats or something to it, and then you could send via a Japanese phone system this picture to someone. So this started what I would call the third revolution of photography, that everybody is now a photographer. But at the end, there's still some rules in photography, which means an exhibition like you see here, in our opinion, as like a camera, we have 17 galleries worldwide. We produce these kind of exhibitions. This exhibition here you see started 2014. We think that to show photography of what you could call the masters is a sort of possibility to enhance your own way to take pictures. And the quoted Henri Cartier-Bresson, some say the quote is from another Austrian photographer, but it's probably Henri Cartier-Bresson once said the first 10,000 pictures are always bad. So, but in the time of the smartphone, the first 10,000 pictures, probably everybody has now more than 10,000 pictures already taken, and maybe they're still bad. So that means an exhibition like here shows you what photography could be like, and it gives an inspiration, in my opinion, to all of us who are nowadays potentially all photographers. So I hope you enjoy the exhibition, and I would end with an old German saying. Formerly, in the beginning of the 20th century, German photographers, when they met each other, they said to each other, gut Licht. That means good light. In the days of high ISO numbers, nowadays we don't need this anymore, but I would still say to a photographer, because you still need light, gut Licht. Enjoy the exhibition. Thank you for coming.
Oh, a Leica. May I keep it? Buenas noches. Good evening. Welcome. Bonsoir. I just want to talk a little bit about the exhibition you will see and about how it came together. I remember about, well, 4 years ago, in the beginning of 2013, I met Dr. Kaufmann in Salzburg, and we discussed the possibility of a show covering the 100 years of Leica photography. And in general, as a curator, when you come to somebody in the museums, they say, oh yes, this sounds very good. Could you make a concept? And could you meet sponsors? And could you bring the money with you and everything? And Dr. Kaufmann, in 5 minutes, said, okay, do it. And I remember me going back to the train station, and I thought by myself, oh God, I have a little bit more than 1 year to put everything together. But finally, I think we succeeded, and now I'm very happy that with the help of many private collectors, gallerists, and photographers, we have the chance to bring really incredible material together. I think you never again will see so many high-quality prints on a museum wall, because today, as with every auction, the price for vintage photographs, for iconic photographs, goes into enormous amounts. It will no longer be possible to create such an exhibition, which indeed comes from very different lenders. The whole thing starts, as Karin Rehn-Kaufmann has already emphasized, with Oskar Barnack. We see him here on his desk. It is a bit later, perhaps in the 1920s, and if you want, this is sort of the Silicon Valley of photography in early Germany. You see his desk, you see a Leica body, and you see on the wall the little papers. These were his scribbles, where he noted every idea he had. In the show we have 4 examples of these scribbles. He always thought about his camera and tried to make it better and better. Unfortunately, Oskar Barnack was a man who was more in technology, and he did not really write. In our days, where every politician is writing his autobiography, it's really a pity that Oskar Barnack never wrote a real autobiography that explains how he came to the idea to use 35mm cinema film for a camera. Perhaps it was because he used to make films, and perhaps one day he had the idea to use that material for a photographic camera that would be small, that would be late white, that would be easily to handle. The only thing we have is his diary, where you see in the middle of the left page, Lilliput Kamera mit Kinofilm fertig. Lilliput camera with cinema film ready. This is the starting point of the whole story, and you see it was in February 1914, in March 1914, so that's the beginning of the whole Leica story. What he produced was a prototype, or was a camera that he only made for himself. This is the very first model, the Ur-Leica, as we call it today. And perhaps you see two things. The first one, it is very elegant. It is really reduced in the design. It's near the Bauhaus aesthetics. And it is very small. The original, or a replica of the original, you can see upstairs. And you will agree, it's really a camera that is not much bigger than your smartphone or your mobile phone. The idea was to create a camera with which you really could make images every day, spontaneous images, images in the street. This is an image Oskar Barnack did during the mobilization in August 1914, and it shows two interesting things. It's a street scene, so this is the beginning of 35mm reportage, and the second thing is that the quality of the image is already quite good, although Oskar Barnack had to use traditional movie film, cinema film, which was grainy and very slow, but his images proved already that with this camera you can really operate. It's not only a toy, it is something for professional photography, perhaps one day. This is the Eisenmarkt in Wetzlar, the marketplace in his hometown Wetzlar, where the lights company was in those days. It is still there, but in 1918-19 it looked like that. And you see the little boy running through the image. Of course, this would have been something a traditional view camera photographer would have avoided. He would have placed his camera on a tripod. He would have waited until everybody is silent, and then he would made his image on a glass plate. But here you have that surrealist spirit, the boy running through the image, which gives the image a very interesting appeal. In 1920, there was a flood in Wetzlar, and Oskar Barnack used his prototype camera to make a first reportage on that problem, on that event. And you must imagine somebody with a big glass plate camera going through the water, impossible to make a series of images, but with that small camera you could do it. He also entered a Zeppelin that's again the flood, and you see how he's making really a series in very difficult situation. And he also entered a Zeppelin in those days, and he took photographs from above, which also was quite near. Of course, in the 19th century already Nadar had taken photographs from a balloon, but this was really the exception. With this camera, you really could easily do pictures like that. I think that the company owner, Dr. Ernst Leitz's son, saw these images and he said, okay, that's not so bad. We are specialized in microscopes, but perhaps we could produce it. And the question really raised in a moment where economically in Germany things went very, very bad. And so in 1924, the company decided to build the Barnack camera. It came on the market in spring 1925, and this was the very first model introduced in 1925 with the optical lens constructed by Max Berg, who with Oskar Barnack was the second important name in the introduction of the Leica. There were small cameras before the Leica, detective cameras, things like that, but they all were more or less toys, not really made for professional photography, but this camera really worked very well because the Lights company had a lot of experience in microscopes, and they could transfer this experience in producing their cameras. We have this, not exactly this camera, but a similar one upstairs in the show, and if you would bring it out of the vitrine, you could immediately start to work with it. After 90 years, it works very well. We are a bit talking in the show about the technology to make or to help people understand what was new with the Leica. It was small, the lens was perfect, it was fitted for short distances, it was quick, and it was made for 35mm film. That means you could make 36 frames one after the other. And when people ask you why 36 frames, why not 35 or 30 or 25 or 40, there is a legend going that it is the arms of Oskar Barnack, because you had to use traditional cinema film that you used in 50 meters, so you had to cut. And when you cut, you make like this, snap, and this gives 35 frames. These are the arms of Oskar Barnack. One of the first very important photographers using the Leica was Cartier-Bresson. Of course, the traditional photographers, having their view cameras, they were not really convinced about that little camera, but artists like Alexander Rodchenko or Henri Cartier-Bresson, they very quickly understood the potential of that little camera. Such an image you cannot do with a view camera. So the Leica really opened the doors for a completely new way, a new aesthetic in photography. There is dynamic in the image, there is the real life in the image, and somebody like Cartier-Bresson was able to work with that toy camera, if you want, from the very first moment. Of course, Cartier-Bresson was a trained painter, and of course the camera doesn't make images. This camera standing here doesn't make the image. You need a brain and you need the eyes, and Cartier-Bresson of course had both. We are here in a wonderful building, Telefónica. I learned in these days that it was constructed in 1926, so 1 year after the introduction of the Leica, the building started to become reality. And it was the first skyscraper in Europe, what I heard. And of course, with these new buildings and new architecture, you also can make different images. You go upstairs and you make photographs from above. That's what Anton Stankowski did. And he did an image that is really in the spirit of the surrealist period. He used images like that for modern advertising. Also, portraiture found a new direction here with a portrait by René Jacques, a French photographer. The image was taken in 1932. I had the pleasure to meet René Jacques in Paris in 1999, I think. He died a couple of years later, and all his archive went to a museum in the north of France, and it was impossible to get any image. So it was very sad that I hadn't an image in the show. But when I went to the flea market in Porte de Clignancourt in Paris, I found this wonderful image, and the lady looked at me and she said, "Take me with you, I want to be part of the show." So I bought the image for our exhibition. It is one of the really wonderful vintage prints, and if you are not familiar with the term, vintage print means it's a print made by the photographer shortly after the negative was taken. So this is a very old print that still has the thumbprints of René Jacques when he went in the darkroom. This is a fantastic print by Lothar Rübelt, an Austrian photographer who was specialized in sports, who made this fantastic image, and I think it comes from the Westlicht collection, a collection in Vienna that was very helpful for our exhibition, and I'm very glad that some of the representatives, Peter Köhn and Rebecca Reuter, are with us tonight coming from Vienna. Erich Salomon was a very important reportage photographer in the 20s in Berlin, in Germany. He was a lawyer, but he changed to photography and he was one of the main photographers, for example, the Berliner Illustrierte Zeitung. He was killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1940, and before being arrested by the Gestapo, he could hide his negatives in his garden. After the war, his son found the negatives, gave them to the Berlinische Galerie, and we got some new prints from Erich Salomon. This image taken by Salomon in America shows people at a football match, and it's very aesthetically, it's very typical for the Leica, because of course it is quite unsharp. The lady in the middle isn't sharp. The man on the left side is cropped. There is just on the right side and behind people are sharp. But these rules are no longer important in the Leica world. What is important is that you really have the feeling that you are among the crowd. You are in the middle of the football match. Everybody is very interested. So it's about the transport of emotion, not information, emotion. That's what's important of this in this image. An image from the Christian Skrein collection in Austria. Also, Christian Skrein is with us. Thank you very much for your support and your help. This image was taken in 1935, so 10 years after the image, the Leica was introduced, and you see professional photographers in Paris. There is no Leica around. So you see the traditionalists, they still stood with their old equipment. The problem was with a camera like that, you could make one shoot, you had to change the glass plate, so a series was almost impossible. But you see also how the men are dressed. This is a traditional type of photographer with the hat and everything. The new generation, the Bauhaus photographers, Molly Notch, they were completely different, and they made completely different images. This is a very interesting publication in the early Leica magazine called Die Leica, which I found in the Leica archives during my research in Wetzlar, and I also want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Sonja and Günzer Osterloh, who really helped me in an incredible way to get through these enormous archive, and together we found that publication, images made by Alfred Eisenstedt. And you see Eisenstedt was in a train, and the train was passing an accident, and he opened quickly the window, and with his Leica he made 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the story written on the left side goes, you only can make that with a Leica. With a glass plate camera, it's impossible to open the window, to put the camera on a tripod or something to make one image and then it's gone. So here he could make 4 images. So this was a very early example for the possibilities of the Leica. A very iconic image, Robert Capa's Falling Soldier, Spanish Civil War, 1936, from the Christian Skrein collection, a fantastic vintage print you will see upstairs. You will never again see that print again, or a print of that quality, the picture on that quality. The story goes that perhaps he has staged the image. I don't think so. Robert Capa was a too strong character. He didn't need to stage his reportage photographs. After the war, a new generation starts taking photographs in the spirit of what we call today photographie humaniste. Edouard Bouba, a fantastic photographer based in Paris, working very much in formal elegance. You see how he's working with the formal possibilities of his camera and of photography here, the Jardin du Luxembourg in Paris. Also Sabine Weiss, in this year 93 years old, based in Paris, a very nice lady. I had to go 3 times to her. You know, as a freelance curator, it's not so easy to convince people to take part in a show. If you are the director of the Museum Pompidou, it's more easy than if you come as a freelancer from Munich. So I had to drink a lot of Porto with her. to convince her to give us some prints. This was done in the early 50s in Paris, in the Périphérique, one of her iconic images that she did on Paris. Aragula, a very, very interesting photographer living in Istanbul. He recently got the Leica, the big Leica prize. He is really the great documentary photographer of old Istanbul in the 50s. He's a fantastic personality, and he's Armenian. And when I made a guided tour in Berlin, and I told the group, this is the most famous Turkish photographer, a young girl came to me and she held my arm and she said, "Sir, may I interrupt you? He's not Turkish, he's Armenian." So you see the problems perhaps that still exist in the world. A photographer from Germany, Walter Vogel, perhaps you do not know him, but it was also an idea of the show to introduce names that are not so familiar to the public. So to the Spanish public, I wanted to introduce Walter Vogel. To the German public, I wanted to introduce Ramon Massats and some Spanish photographers. So this exhibition also has, in a way, a political mission, if you want, to show to others what the European and international photographic culture can create as wonderful images. The whole show you can read on several levels. You can read it on a technological level, how technology has evolved from small images to big color ones. You can read it on the level of history, the reportage photography that reflects our history in the 20th century, but you can also read it on the level of fashion photography. What did people wear in different periods of our history? And it was very nice when in Hamburg we started the show, and there were the whole stuff in the museum was very enthusiastic, because the show, there was so much public and families came and children came, and when the families came to give away their clothing because it was winter time, and then the people at the garderobière, they said, "Oh, you children care about the dogs and care about what people wear and count how many horses you see in the show." So there was a lot of also educational visual training going around. Our key visual, the image for our poster and our invitation card, created by Christer Strömholm, a Swedish photographer based in Paris during the 50s. He got access to a group of transsexual people that lived very apart from the bourgeois society, but Christer Strömholm got the access to that group, and he could make that wonderful image, which he never printed during his lifetime. So his son, Joachim Strömholm, was so nice to give us the negative and to give us the possibility to use this wonderful image. We had the pleasure to say hello to Ramon Massats this afternoon. He came to us to celebrate the opening. I discovered his work during PHotoEspaña about 18 years ago, during a show at the Círculo de Bellas Artes, and I was really thrilled by what I saw, and I thought it's impossible that I never heard about this photographer. So it was from the very beginning, it was one idea of the show to present to the European public more of the great Spanish tradition in photography, because I thought it is really names like Ricard Terré, Leopoldo Pomés, or Alberto García Alix, they really should be more accepted by the international public. Here, Ricard Terré, really a very, very special approach to what we would call documentary photography. Leopoldo Pomés, René Burri, a photographer from Switzerland who during his life made photographs in Germany. He did a fantastic book in 1962 with editor Robert Delpire, and the topic on the Germans never left him until his death in 2013. In 2014, he didn't stop making photographs of the Germans. Will McBride, an American who finally lived in Germany, fantastic photographer who covered also the post-war Germany, and then the color photography with Saul Leiter. Saul Leiter, an American who very early on started to shoot in color. The problem in the 50s with color photography was it was very expensive. With a Kodachrome you got a slide, which was not very attractive to have a slide instead of a print, and the public didn't accept color. The magazine didn't print it, and the color, the museum world, the art world said, color is not art. There was a statement by Walker Evans going, color is vulgar. So there were very rare photographers working in color. One of them was Saul Leiter, and I had the great pleasure to meet Saul Leiter, I think in 1997 in New York, a poor man living in a very small apartment. He was quite skeptical when we did the interview, but he told me all his life it was fantastic. And at the end of this very strange interview, I said, Mr. Leiter, I have to ask you a question. You told me stories. Are they jokes or was it the truth? And he said, he stopped a bit and then he said, although perhaps it's not a big advantage to tell the truth, I tried not to lie. That was the end of this wonderful interview. Today he's one of the famous color photographers, but unfortunately he doesn't live anymore. Fred Herzog, also one of the pioneers of color photography, working in Canada. I had the great pleasure to meet Saul Leiter during the opening in Hamburg in 2014, and I have to say I had really the fantastic opportunity to meet most of these people, and they all are so great characters, and it's not only about good pictures, these people really represent fantastic personalities. Mitch Epstein, younger generation in color photography, also using the view camera, but as well working in 35mm aesthetics. Martin Parr, he started as a Leica photographer. Very few people know, but one day he had to escape from black and white and Leica to escape from Cartier-Bresson's aesthetic and to find his own way, of course, in color photography using flash and so on. Rudi Meisel, photographer from Germany, who in the 80s covered Eastern Germany, a fantastic series that you will see upstairs in our show. And Viktor Kolář, a photographer from Ostrava in Czechoslovakia, who never left his hometown, a little town, mining town, but you don't need to go to beautiful Madrid to make good photographs. You can stay in your little dirty hometown to see and to transport and to translate everyday life in fantastic images. Michel van den Eekhout, Belgian photographer. I always admired his approach towards animals. All his life he covered animals in more or less funny or tragic situations. And when I asked him 2 years before we started the exhibition, perhaps to give us some prints, he was very, very enthusiastic about it. And about 6 or 8 weeks before the show opened, he wrote me a letter and an email, of course. He said he had a cancer diagnosis and he wouldn't be able to print anymore. And about 3 weeks before the show, there was a package coming with 4 prints that we framed immediately and brought to the wall. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. But his wife and widow came in Ghent to see the opening, and she was very, very happy that her husband is part of the show. Alberto García Alix, I had the great pleasure also to meet him during PHotoEspaña in the late 90s. And since these days, we meet every year, and he was also so grateful and so helpful to give us some of his Leica word for the show. As you know, he also works with medium format 6x6 Hasselblad or Rolleiflex. mit Jeff Mermelstein, New York-based photographer, also walking around with his Leica, street scenes, street shots. When he became aware that this image would become very, very asked for, postcards, whatever, he had to try to find the man to get the model release finally, because today in street photography is quite difficult, and you can easily have a lawyer behind you. So finally he really got it. I mean, to find the man in New York is quite a challenge. Again, Jeff Mermelstein from New York, and then Julia Bayer, part of the younger generation working with the Leica. She is part of that movement that is not so much interested in just documenting our environment, but to ask questions to the medium itself. How does it work? How do we see images? How do we work on the decipher images? How difficult is it sometimes? So her creations really work around these questions concerning the medium itself. Finally, again, Julia Bayer. We have 5 images in the show, and you see they are quite tall. Meanwhile, photographers have a different framing and have very different formats in their creation. Again, Julia Bayer. I have one more image on my list, but the technique, yes, here it is. Here we go, Bruce Gilden. Bruce Gilden, a series taken in 2014. So you see that we really span 100 years of Leica photography. This is the only series that is taken with a digital Leica, with a S2. It's also the idea perhaps in a few years to create an individual show on digital Leica photography. This is just one statement in that technology. Bruce Gilden has, perhaps you know him, he's a Magnum member. He is almost 70 years, but you have the impression he's 17. He's comes in sneakers. He's very dynamic, and I love his way of thinking, his philosophy. And he says ugliness doesn't exist. Everybody has the right to live. Everybody's beautiful. We are all different, and that's a big gift that we are different. And some look like the magazine glossy pages, and others look a bit different. And I'm interested in people that look a bit different. And the technology of digital photography helps him, because he can immediately show to people the photograph, and he gets into a discussion saying, you are beautiful, and I love your image, I love your face, I love your appearance. And so finally he has a big group of portraits of a bit a different approach and a different feeling. So this is just a short introduction into the history of Leica photography. We could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I think the best thing is to see the images in original, and all these are original images. It's not reproductions or something like that. It's a huge collection of vintage prints coming from different private or public collections that you never again will see in this quality and in this concentrated form. So thank you very much for your patience. Enjoy the show. Come back. Bring your friends with you, and the friends of your friends, and your grandmothers. And I hope we have a lot of public in this fantastic Telefónica space. Thank you very much.
Solo deciros que la exposición es en la tercera planta, y si queréis subir, pues la podremos visitar ahora mismo. Gracias.